There's a thing my father told me once, back when his hands still worked and the store was still his. He said you can tell everything about a man not by how he treats the people who can pay him back, but by how he treats the thing that can't. I didn't understand him then. I was young and stupid, and I thought money was the only kind of rich there was. Then one September a man in $1,000 coat knelt down in the mud behind my store, beside an animal that everyone in town had already decided to let die, and he stayed there for 3 days without eating, without sleeping, talking to it like it could understand him. People drove out from 2 counties over just to laugh at him. I'm the one who stopped laughing first. What I'm about to tell you happened slow, and then all at once, and there's a part near the end I've never told another living soul. Because the first few times I tried, I couldn't get the words out without my voice breaking, and a man my age doesn't like to be seen that way. But I'm old now, older than that donkey ever got to be, and some stories you have to set down before you go or they go with you. So stay with me, this one's worth it. The rain had been coming sideways since noon, the kind of cold September rain that doesn't fall so much as get thrown at you, and I was inside counting nails by the handful when I heard the sound. It wasn't a loud sound. That's the thing I keep coming back to. If it had been loud, I'd have ignored it. Loud means trouble, and trouble in Coldwater usually means 2 ranch hands settling something stupid out front, and I'd learned a long time ago to let them settle it. But this was soft. A kind of low, wet, hitching groan, the sound a thing makes when it stopped expecting anyone to come. I'm Walter Mercer. People call me Walt. I've run the general store on the corner of Main and the old freight road for 31 years, the same as my father did before me, and the same way I count nails and weigh flour and write everything, down in the ledger I keep under the counter. My wife used to say I'd write down my own funeral if somebody'd let me hold the pencil. She's been gone 4 years now. The ledger I've still got. I set down the nails. I went to the back. The back of my store opens onto an alley that isn't really an alley, just the gap between my building and the feed lot, where the rain runs off the roof in a sheet and pools against the foundation. There's a lean-to back there where I keep barrels, and under the lean-to, half in the water and half out, was a donkey. I'd never seen anything so close to dead, still trying to breathe. It was small, smaller than it should have been, which I understood later was the starving, and its coat had gone the color of wet ash, hanging off the bones underneath like a sheet thrown over furniture. Its ribs, God, its ribs. You could have played them like a washboard. One of its ears had a tear in it, old and healed crooked. The hooves were split and grown long the way they get when nobody's cared for an animal in a long, long while. And its eye, the one I could see, was open, and it was looking at me, and there was nothing in it. No fear, no begging, just a kind of patient, bottomless tiredness, the look of a creature that has decided dying is simply the next chore on a list it's too weary to finish. I want to tell you, I felt a great surge of pity. I'd like to be that man in the telling. The truth is, my first thought was, what a mess to deal with in the rain. The truth is, I stood there and did the arithmetic the way I do everything, and the arithmetic said this animal was finished, and a finished animal is a hole to dig and a back that aches for a week, and I was 63 years old and tired, and the flour needed weighing. I'm not proud of that thought. I'm telling you because the man who comes next did not have it, and you won't understand him unless you understand me first. I went back inside. I told myself I'd send the boy from the livery out in the morning to haul it off once it had passed. I picked the nails back up. And that's where it would have ended, a dead donkey, a dug hole, a line in nobody's ledger, except that the bell over my front door rang, and the man came in. You knew he was money before he said a word. Not flashy money. The other kind. The quiet, deep kind that doesn't have to announce itself because it's never once in its life been refused anything. His coat was oilcloth over good wool, soaked through but cut for a body that ate well and stood straight. His boots were the kind a working man dreams about and a rich man wears to look like a working man. He was maybe 50, with gray coming in hard at the temples and a face that had been handsome once and was now mostly weather and patience. He took off his hat when he came in, which surprised me. Rich men usually don't, in a store like mine. "Afternoon," he said. "I'm looking to buy some things." "Then you've come to the right place," I said, "on the worst possible day to come anywhere." He smiled at that just a little. He had a good smile, tired but good. He bought strange things. That's what I remember. Not the supplies of a man passing through, not tobacco and shells and hardtack. He bought a wool blanket, the heaviest I had. He bought a sack of rolled oats and another of bran. He bought molasses and a tin pail and clean rags and a bottle of liniment, and when I rang it all up, he paid in folded bills without looking at them, the way you'd pay for a cup of coffee. "You doctoring a horse?" I asked, just making talk. "Don't know yet what I'm doctoring," he said. "Heard a noise out back of your building when I rode up. Went to look." My stomach did something then, a small, cold turning. "That donkey's done for, mister," I said. "Been down a while, I expect. Nothing back there but a hole waiting to be dug. No sense throwing good supplies after it." He looked at me for a long moment. He had pale eyes, gray-green, and they weren't unkind, but they went through you. "You already saw it," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I saw it. And you came back in here." He didn't say it cruel. He didn't say it as an accusation at all. He said it the way you'd note the weather. But it landed in me like a slap because it was true and because there was no judgment in it, which is somehow always worse than judgment. Judgment you can argue with. A plain fact you can only stand there and own. I didn't say anything. He gathered up his purchases, settled his hat back on his head and said, "Mind if I use your lean-to? I'll pay for the space." "You don't have to pay for the—" I started, and then I stopped, because I realized I had no idea what I was about to agree to. "What is it you mean to do?" "Don't rightly know that either," he said, "but it's looking at me, and I've been looked at like that before from the inside of it, so—" He shrugged, and there was a whole life in that shrug. A life I didn't get to read for a long time yet. I'm going to go sit with it a while. And he went out the back, into the sideways rain, and he knelt down in the mud beside that dying animal, and he did not get up for 3 days. I have to tell you about the town now, because the town is half this story, and the town does not come off well. Coldwater in those years was maybe 400 souls, and it ran the way small places run, on knowledge, everybody knowing everybody's business and trading in it like currency. By suppertime that first night, the whole town knew there was a stranger in Walt Mercer's back lot, kneeling in the rain over a half-dead burro, and by the next morning they knew he was rich, because Hollies at the livery had seen his horse, a blood bay gelding worth more than most men in Coldwater would earn in a decade, and rich men doing strange things is the finest free entertainment a small town ever gets. They came to look, not all at once, in ones and twos, finding reasons to walk past my store, to step inside and buy a nickel's worth of nothing so they could drift to my back window and watch. "He's still out there." "Still out there." "Doing what?" "Sitting, talking to it, looks like." "Talking to it," a snort. "Rich man's gone soft in the head, that's what that is." And they'd laugh, comfortable in it. The easy cruelty of people who have decided a thing is funny so they don't have to decide whether it's something else. I want to be fair. It did look strange. It looked, from the warm, dry inside of my store, almost like madness. A wealthy man down on his knees in freezing mud, his fine coat ruined, holding a tin pail of warmed bran and molasses to the lips of an animal that wouldn't drink, murmuring to it low and steady, hour after hour, while the rain came down and the dark came down and the cold came down, and he never once got up to come inside where it was warm. He didn't ask me for help. That's the thing. He never asked me for one single thing those first hours except the once. Round about midnight that first night I couldn't sleep. I came down and I looked out the back window and he was still there, a dark shape against the dark, and the lantern he'd lit was guttering low. And I don't know what got into me. I'd like to say it was kindness. I think it was mostly shame, the kind that won't let you rest. I heated water on the stove and I filled a jar and wrapped it in a cloth, the way you do for a cold bed, and I took it out to him. For the animal, I said, gruff, holding it out. Tuck it against its belly, keeps the core warm, learned it doctoring calves. He looked up at me, and his face in the lantern light was wet, rain or otherwise. I couldn't say, and he took the jar and he said, "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." He'd remembered my name from the ledger I'd had him sign. Nobody remembered my name. "It drinking yet?" I asked. "No," he said, "but it stopped pulling away when I touch it, that's something. An hour ago it'd flinch, now it lets me." He pressed the warm jar gently against the donkey's hollow flank, and the animal let out a long, shuddering breath and its eye half closed. "It's deciding," he said quietly. "Right now, tonight, it's deciding they do that. They get to a place where it'd be easier to just let go, and they sit at that door a while, and whether they walk through it or turn back," he stopped. "Sometimes it depends on whether there's a reason to turn back, whether there's anybody on this side of the door worth coming back for." I stood there in the rain in my nightshirt and my coat, an old man, and I didn't have anything to say to that. "You should go in," he said, "catch your death." "So should you." He smiled that tired smile. "I'm exactly where I mean to be," he said. So I went in, and I lay awake, and I'll tell you the truth, I prayed for that donkey. First time I'd prayed since I buried my wife. I didn't pray to God exactly. I just lay there in the dark and aimed a kind of wanting out into the night, toward the back lot, toward the man and the animal at the door between living and not. Turn back, I thought, at the donkey. Turn back. There's somebody on this side worth it. I didn't know yet how true that was, or for which of them. Morning came gray, and the rain had stopped, and the donkey was alive. Barely, but alive. And the man, I still didn't have his name. He'd signed the ledger only S. Calloway, in a hand that had once learned to write the hard way and never quite forgotten it. The man was asleep. Sitting up, his back against the lean-to post, his ruined coat wrapped not around himself but around the animal, and the donkey's head was resting in his lap. Just resting there. Trusting, the way a thing trusts only when it's too weak to be afraid anymore or when it's decided. I stood at the window, and I watched the two of them sleep in the gray morning light. The rich man with no coat shivering in his sleep, and the starving donkey warm under his coat. And I felt something come loose in my chest that I hadn't felt move in years. Behind me the bell rang. It was the Hutchins boys, two of them, come for their free morning's entertainment, and they crowded up to the window grinning. "He still," one started. "Get out," I said. They blinked at me. "Walt." "Get out of my store," I said, and something in my voice was new even to me, "and don't you laugh. Don't you dare stand in my store and laugh at that man. You don't know what you're looking at." My voice cracked on it. Neither did I. They left. They thought I'd gone strange too. Let them think it. I went to the stove, and I made a pot of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and I poured 2 cups, and I carried them out the back into the cold, clear morning, to the man who had stayed, and the animal that had turned back. Calloway woke when my boots scraped the gravel. His eyes opened all at once, the way a careful man's do, and they found me, and then they found the steaming cups in my hands, and then, slow, like the sun coming over a ridge, they warmed. "It made it through the night," he said, hoarse. "I see that," I said. "You look about as bad as the donkey." He laughed. It surprised him, I think, that laugh, like it came up from somewhere he'd had closed off. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer," he said, and shifted to make room beside him in the cold mud of my own back lot as if it were his to offer. "Sit down. I'll tell you why I stopped." I sat. The donkey opened one eye, looked at the both of us, decided we were no threat, and closed it again. And Silas Calloway, the richest man ever to set foot in Coldwater, began to talk. But that's where I'll stop the first part, because what he told me changes everything that comes after, and you'll want to hear it the way I heard it, with the coffee going cold in my hands, and the morning getting brighter, and the both of us watching that ruined little animal breathe. He didn't start with himself. That's worth knowing about the man. He started with the donkey. You know what they used to do with the ones that couldn't work anymore? He asked me. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking out past the feed lot at the long gray reach of the prairie going green gold under the cleared sky. In the mines, the borax operations, the silver, they'd use mules mostly, but burros too for the close work, the tunnels too tight for a mule. Put a youngster down in the dark and they'd grow up there. Some of them never saw the sun, born to it and dead to it, their whole lives by lantern. And when they got too old to haul or went lame or their wind gave out, he stopped. His jaw worked. Well, a bullet costs money, and these were not men who spent money they didn't have to, so mostly they just turned them loose, out in country with no water and no graze. Let the desert do for free what a bullet cost a nickel. That's where this one came from, I asked. I'd bet my whole spread on it, he said. Look at the eyes, the way the pupils are. That's an animal that lived in the dark a long time and got let go in the light to die. I've seen it before. He was quiet a moment. I've been it before. And then he told me. I'm going to give it to you the way he gave it to me, near as I can, because I've turned it over 1,000 times since, and I think I've got it close to right. Silas Calloway was born poor. Not cold-water poor, poor like a thing you don't survive mostly. His people were nothing, dead early, and he was put to work in a mine in the territories before he was 10 years old, one of those boys who go down in the dark and grow up there. A trapper, they called the little ones, sat in the black all day by a wooden door in the tunnel, opening it for the carts and closing it after. Hours and hours alone in a dark so complete he said you forgot your own face. There was a burro down there with me, he said. Old Jenny, gray like this one. They worked her in the haulage and she was near the end of her use even then, and the men didn't have a kind word for her and she didn't have one for them. But me, his voice did something. I was a child alone in the dark and she was the only warm living thing within reach, and I'd press up against her in the cold between the carts and she'd let me. Never bit, never kicked, just let me. A child and a worn-out animal keeping each other from the cold 1,000 feet under the world. He shook his head slowly. She wasn't anything to anybody. To me, she was the only thing that ever once acted glad I was alive. What happened to her? I asked. I shouldn't have, I knew by his face. They turned her out, he said. When her wind went, I was 12. Begged the foreman not to, got knocked down for the begging. They led her up the shaft and out, and I never saw her again, and I knew exactly what out meant. Knew it would be slow. Knew she'd stand somewhere with no water and wait for somebody to come back for her because she'd always trusted, and nobody ever was going to come. He stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes hard once. I told myself when I got out of that dark, and I did get out, clawed out, made myself into all this. He gestured vaguely at his ruined fine clothes, his money, his life. I told myself I'd never again in my life walk past a thing that trusted and leave it to wait for somebody who wasn't coming. He turned and looked at me then, full on. And I rode into this town yesterday, he said, on the way to something else, something that doesn't matter now, and I heard a sound behind a general store. And there it was, gray, worn out, turned loose to die in the light after a life in the dark, looking at me, waiting. And Mr. Mercer, his voice went very low, I have built an empire and buried 2 wives and made and ruined men, and I have never once been as sure of anything as I was, kneeling in that mud, that I was not going to be one more person who walked past. I didn't have any words. I'm a man of small words on my best day, so I did the only thing I had. I reached over and I put my hand on his shoulder, his soaked cold shoulder, and I left it there a while. And we sat, 2 old men in the mud, and we watched the donkey breathe. That was the second morning. By the third day the town had changed its tune, the way towns do too late, and pretending it had never sung the other one. Word had got around. I don't know how. I didn't tell it, but a thing like that gets out, and pretty soon the story going around Coldwater wasn't rich fool talks to a dead donkey. It was the rich man saving the donkey, told warm now, told proud, like the town had been rooting for him all along. The same Hutchins boy who'd grinned in my window came back with his mother, and she'd baked a pie, and she left it on my counter for the gentleman out back and wouldn't take a cent. Hollies from the livery came with proper farrier's tools and trimmed the donkey's grown-out hooves for free, gentle as a man handling a newborn, while Calloway held its head and talked it through the fear. The widow Akeson sent over her late husband's heavy horse blanket. Somebody, I never found out who, left a sack of good carrots on the lean-to post overnight. It should have warmed me all that, mostly it did. But I'll be honest because I promised you honest. Part of me was sour about it. Where were all these warm hearts the first night in the rain when the laughing was easy and a man and an animal were alone at the door between living and dying? It's a cheap kind of kindness, the kind that shows up once the dying part is over and there's only the pretty part left. I said as much to Calloway low, while the latest well-wisher walked back up the road. He surprised me. "Don't begrudge them," he said. "You did it too." "Did what?" "Walked past the first time, then came back." He scratched the donkey gently between its torn ears and it leaned into his hand. "That's most of being a person, Mr. Mercer, walking past and then turning around. The whole town's just doing now what you did 3 nights ago. The turning around's the thing. Doesn't matter much how long it takes a body to do it, long as it gets done before it's too late." "Generous of you," I said. "No," he said. "I'm the least generous man you'll ever meet. I just know exactly what it costs to be the thing nobody turns around for." He looked at me. "I'm trying to make sure that's not the last thing this one knows." We named the donkey on the 4th day. Or rather, Calloway did, and I argued and lost. "Lazarus," he said. "That's a foolish name for a donkey," I said. "Came back from the dead, didn't he?" "It's a Jenny," I said. "It's a she." He considered this. "Lazarus all the same," he said. "She's earned a Bible name, came further back than most. And so Lazarus she was and is, in the only ledger that matters, which is the one I'm reading you from now. Out of memory. She stood up on the 5th day. I want you to understand what that was. She'd been down so long I half believed her legs had forgotten how. But on the 5th morning, with the sun warm on the lean-to and her belly full for the first time in God knows how long, she gathered those 4 ruined legs underneath herself, and she heaved, and she fell, and she heaved again, and Calloway didn't help her. That's the part I remember. He wanted to, his whole body wanted to. I watched him hold himself back, because some things a creature has to do its own self or they don't count. And on the 3rd try she stood, swaying, trembling like a leaf in wind, but standing, up on her own 4 feet in the sunlight, blinking at a world she'd been turned out into to die in, with 2 old men and half a town watching, and she lifted her torn-eared gray head and she looked around at all of it. And she brayed. Lord, that sound, cracked and broken and absolutely furious with life. The ugliest, most beautiful noise I ever heard a living thing make. Somebody behind me started clapping and then everybody was, the whole little crowd of us, clapping and laughing, and some of us, I won't say who, wiping at our faces, for a donkey, for a worn-out, turned-out gray donkey standing up in the sun. Calloway didn't clap. He just stood there in front of her, this hard, rich, ruined man, and he put his forehead against her forehead, gentle, and he closed his eyes, and his shoulders shook once, and I looked away, because some things aren't for watching. I thought that was the happy ending. I thought we'd come to it. We hadn't. There was one more turn to come, and it's the one that took me 40 years to be able to say out loud. But I'll save it for the last part, the way Calloway would have wanted. He always did believe the turning around was the thing, and there was one more turning still ahead of all of us, and it wasn't the donkey's, and it wasn't mine. He couldn't stay. I knew it before he said it. Men like that never can. The empire that lets them be soft for a week is the same empire that won't let them be soft for 2. There was a thing he'd been riding toward when he heard the sound behind my store business, the cold kind, and it was waiting on him still, and a week of kneeling in the mud doesn't make the world wait longer than a week. On the seventh day he came to me in the store early, before the town was up. "I have to ride on, Mr. Mercer," he said. "I know it," I said. "She can't travel yet. Won't be able to for a good while, and where I'm going is no place for her even when she can. Hard country, hard men." He turned his hat in his hands, that old learned-the-hard-way habit, the poor boy still living somewhere inside the rich one. "I came to ask you something, and I want you to say no if it's no. I've had enough of people saying yes to me because of who I am." "Ask it." "Keep her," he said. "Lazarus, keep her here with you. She likes you, don't tell me she doesn't. I've watched her watch you. I'll send money, more than enough. You'll never spend out what I send for her. Feed the farrier, whatever she needs the rest of her days. But the keeping," his voice caught, "the keeping I can't do, and I can't bear to give her to just anybody. I can only give her to somebody who'd turn around, and I've already watched you do that." I looked at him a long moment. "You don't have to send any money," I said. "I know I don't have to," he said. "Let me anyway. It's the one thing I'm any good at, and I'd like to be good at it for her." So that was the bargain. And I'd have kept it for nothing, and gladly, and he knew it, which is exactly why he insisted on paying, because that was the only way he knew how to love a thing, by making sure it would never want, and I let him have it, because a man should be allowed to love the way he knows how. He saddled the blood bay in the gray of that morning. The whole goodbye took longer with the donkey than with me. He stood with Lazarus a long time in the lean-to, his forehead against hers the way he'd done the day she stood, and he talked to her low, and I didn't listen. It wasn't mine to hear. Then he straightened, and he ran his hand one last time down her gray neck, and she leaned after him when he stepped away, leaned the way she'd once been too weak to, and he had to make himself not turn back around, and I watched it cost him. To me he just put out his hand, and I shook it, and he said, "Thank you, Walt." Not Mr. Mercer, Walt, only time he ever called me it. "Come back through sometime," I said. "See how she's keeping." "I will," he said. He didn't. Here's the turn. Here's the part I couldn't say for 40 years. The money came, regular, every season, more than Lazarus could have eaten in 10 lifetimes, drawn on a bank 2 territories over, and I kept her like a queen. And she lived God. She lived 11 more years, fat and gray and ornery and beloved by every child in Coldwater. Her torn ear and her crooked-heeled everything, the most spoiled donkey in the state of Texas, brought back from the door at the bottom of the world to grow old in the sun she'd been born away from. But Sela's Calloway never came back through. And after the 3rd year I started to wonder, and after the 5th I made inquiries, the slow kind a man makes through letters, and what I finally learned was this. He died. He died that same autumn, weeks after he rode out of Coldwater. The cold business he'd been riding toward had been a hard ride into hard country, and his heart, which I'd watched do such warm things in my own back lot, had given out on the trail, the way the worn-out ones do, the ones who spent a whole life in the dark before they ever found the sun. He'd known. That's the thing that took the wind out of me when I worked it back. The doctors had told him, before ever he came to Coldwater. That's why he was riding so hard toward the end of his business, to finish it before his time finished him. A dying man, riding to wrap up an empire, who heard a small wet sound behind a general store and got down off his horse and spent some of the last days he had left in this world kneeling in the mud, in the rain, saving a worn-out gray donkey that everybody else had already turned away from. A man at his own door between living and dying, choosing to spend it pulling something else back from theirs. The money kept coming after he was gone. He'd seen to it, set it up in trust before he rode out so that whether he lived or died, Lazarus would never want a thing. He arranged the whole tail end of a starving turned-out donkey's life from inside the shadow of his own death, and he never said a word of it to me because he didn't want me keeping her out of pity for him. He wanted her kept for her own self, So I never knew while he was dying that he was dying. He gave me the gift of getting to be sour about the warm-hearted town. He gave me the gift of the ordinary version of the story. I've thought about it most mornings since. The richest man I ever met, with everything to do and no time left to do it in, got down in the mud beside the thing the whole world had walked past. Because once, 1,000 feet under the earth, a worn-out gray animal had been the only living thing that ever once acted glad a forgotten child was alive. And he could not, with his last good days, leave one more such creature waiting in the dark for somebody who wasn't coming. So he came. Lazarus is buried out back of where the store used to be. There's a stone. It doesn't say much. I keep meaning to add his name to it, and I keep not doing it, because I think he'd have hated that being on the stone. He'd have said the donkey earned it and he was only doing what a person does. Turning around. He always said that was the whole of it, walking past and then turning around.